Hi, it is Tuesday, February 24th, 2026. So yesterday we had an absolutely amazing congressional testimony session from and including a whistleblower from ICE who was a trainer at the ICE Academy until last week that was partnered with Tayana Gibson Brown, one of the most worrying, I guess, victims of the aggressive ICE actions here in Minneapolis in 2026 because there was a lot of recorded footage of the Department of Homeland Security breaking down her door with a battering ram without a judicial warrant in order to detain her husband. This happened while there were kids in the house. So she was the first testifier, and the details of that case are egregious and really what spurned the rest of this testimony. The other major thing that led to this testimony was the complete lies that Director Todd Lyons gave to Congress a couple of weeks ago in the last ICE-focused congressional testimony. It was just egregious, stone-faced, and exactly what you would expect from a toady and a bootlicker. Anyway, let's get into what happened yesterday. I'm going to link the whole 2-hour congressional testimony session. Frankly, the whole 2 hours is worth watching, but I'm going to try to break down the salient points here and hope I stay under 20 minutes because there's a lot. All right, so first, Tayana Gibson Brown. She's a pediatric ICU nurse, St. Paul resident, I believe, and there is viral footage still that they showed during the testimony, again, of her door being broken down after she opens it in her scrubs from her night work the night before. Again, as an ICU nurse. She also has children in the home, and that fact is made apparent to the ICE agent who showed up and broke into it. So yeah, that was on January 11th. Things to note are that her husband was going through the immigration process. His last check-in with authorities was December 29th, so less than 2 weeks before they decided to break down his door to take him into custody. And he had another appointment scheduled for late January. So there was ample room not to perform domestic terrorism in order to bring him in. But that didn't happen. It was an absolutely horrific event and one that we will not forget. So probably the most important testifier was Ryan Schwenk, who is a former, as of a week ago, instructor for the ICE Academy. And that was his tenure as an instructor was from September 2025 to February 2026. I think he had a 4-year tenure at ICE before that, so he was familiar with the organization before the recent militarization. On his first day teaching at the ICE Academy, he was given a physical copy-only memo with no document number, no confidentiality markings that he had to read in the presence of his supervisor at the academy. He had to agree to teach to it, and he had to return the copy of that memo without copying it or keeping any record of it. The memo, the contents, were for him to teach that it is okay for ICE officers to enter people's homes without a judicial warrant. It was made clear to him that if he did not comply and teach this, that it would cost him his job. In fact, he later in his testimony attests that he was the alternative instructor to fill a vacancy for someone else who resigned, refusing to teach to the memo. This memo was dated May 2025 and again didn't have any of the trappings for a government document. Now, document control, for those of you who haven't worked in or dabbled your feet in bureaucracy, is paramount to preserve a record of government actions and activity. Any memo that is to dictate policy that goes into training must be a formalized document and must be subject to document control and preservation. That was not followed, which is a pretty egregious breach of both government policy, and it also paints a pretty damning light for the people in charge of ICE. So it also directly undercut Todd Lyons' previous testimony under oath about such a warrantless entry memo, in which case he kind of lazily deflected it and said there's probably an email. There wasn't. It was physical only, and we now have that lie under oath. Another part of the testimony was the large contradiction between what has been taught to cadets previously at the academy and what's being taught there today. Multiple people quoted this line from DHS training material from 2025 and prior. and that is that physical entry into the home without a proper judicial warrant is the chief evil against which the wording of the Fourth Amendment is directed. In fact, this is a direct quote from Ryan Schwank, who was our testifier and whistleblower ICE trainer. ICE is teaching cadets to violate the Constitution, and they were attempting to cloak it in secrecy by demanding that I lie about it. He further goes on with more details about the training. Todd Lyons also attested to Congress several weeks ago that the condensed 47-day training, down from a much longer training period, is still teaching all the same things, just in a more rigorous environment. First of all, from anybody who understands pedagogy or the amount of information that the human brain can take in, or has ever led or been part of a corporate training or any other training ever, you can't just shrink the training window and expect lessons to still make it into people's heads. But it's not just like an egregious breach of pedagogy that's going on here. It is a deliberate attempt, from what we heard in this testimony, to make sure that people are not being trained on some of the most important aspects of that job. In particular, he said that the 47-day training is not overtime. The 47-day condensed training, in stark contradiction to what we've been told from Todd Lyons, is 5 days a week, 9 hours a day, with 8 hours of lecture and 1 hour of lunch. 1 day a week is 10 hours a day. It's not remotely close to the training that was taking place at the ICE Academy before. They tried to really, streamline or neuter this training in order to hire 13,000 ICE officers that they want to be able to deploy wherever they feel like it. Another thing that's been, or that was brought up, is that they removed the class that tells officers that they have an oath to protect and uphold the Constitution, and the class that tells them that they have personal responsibility to that effect. In essence, new recruits are not being trained on the Constitution or the fact that that needs to be their guiding principle. There's a tremendous amount of practical testing that was removed from the curriculum. So whereas you think of testing, there's really two major parts to it. The first is going to be written testing, which apparently has all been moved to multiple choices that were once closed book that they had to actually pass, and are now all open book multiple choice tests that they will get passed through no matter how they perform on them. So on practical testing, they removed almost all of the practical testing. In fact, the quote from our instructor was that practical testing was either removed or practically neutered. And another further quote on testing and the lack thereof: "We took away the practical testing. Under the old rules, we took everything they learned in the academy and made them apply it. Historically, if they failed these practical exams, we could fail them and send them back. And if they failed them twice, out of the academy, and maybe 6 months or 90 days later, they could retry if they demonstrated to their home office that they were ready. But today, no matter how many mistakes they make, no matter how egregiously they violate the law in their practical, we graduate them." So this, again, directly undercuts Todd Lyons' previous testimony under oath about that condensed training not affecting the curriculum or readiness of new agents. Multiple examples of cadets graduating who have, in the last day or two of their training, drawn their firearms on each other by accident, made arrests of individuals who have committed no crimes and for which there was no cause to make the arrest, officers applying excessive force in training scenarios, including unjustified use of pepper spray and drawing of firearms, and a cadet who pepper sprayed a bystander who was filming in a training exercise, who justified the illegal action to the superiors who questioned on him later by saying, "Because I see what we're doing in Minneapolis." It doesn't matter what we teach them about the law if what they watch on television and on Reddit and on the internet tells them that they can get away with things. Another thing that was brought up is that the egregious actions, including the death of Renee Good, the death of Alex Preddy, the breaking down of doors without a judicial warrant, these were all taken by experienced officers, not new cadets who were mistrained, but by career border protection generally officials who should know better. Senator Masto from Nevada brought up a great question regarding sensitive locations, focusing on schools, churches, and courthouses, which we've seen firsthand have been targeted. Historically, ICE has been trained to avoid them because of the chilling effects that it has on people attending those locations and the pushing away that it does to affected individuals away from our civic society and the protections that society affords them. In the current training environment and in practice here in Minnesota, those areas have not been sanctuary zones, but in fact have been specifically targeted.